The suitcase hit the porch steps with a dull thud, water already seeping into the fabric as the rain poured harder. Paul's voice cut sharper than the storm. "You're nothing but a burden. Mother, I can't do this anymore." His face was tight, eyes flat with something colder than anger finality. I stood in the doorway for a moment, my sweater clinging to my skin, unsure if I should plead or simply walk away. I had once rocked him through fevers, worked double shifts to pay for his textbooks, skipped meals so he never went without. None of that mattered now. His jaw set. His hand shoved the door closed, and the sound of it echoed through me louder than his words. I bent to lift the suitcase, heavier than I remembered, each step down the sidewalk pulling me farther from the life I had built around him. The rain didn't let up. It streamed through my hair, soaked my shoes, blurred the streetlights until they looked like distant fires. I walked without direction, my slippers squishing with every step, until the road curved toward the French Broad River. The overpass loomed above, concrete and shadow. I lowered myself against its wall, pulling the soaked suitcase beneath me like a makeshift bench. Cars hissed past on wet pavement above, their lights flashing briefly across the water. The smell of river mud and gasoline filled the air. I pulled the damp sweater tighter, though it did little against the wind. My bones ached. But it was my chest that hurt most in emptiness, where my son's love should have been. In that moment, I wasn't a nurse, a widow, or even a mother. I was just another woman, left out in the rain, invisible in a city that had once been my home. The storm carried me into the night, and by morning, I had become part of its silence. By dawn, the storm had thinned to a mist that clung to my skin and hair. The overpass offered little shelter, only a break from the heaviest drops. My suitcase sagged beside me, the fabric heavy with water, its zipper rusting with each passing hour. I pressed my back to the cold concrete, listening to the tires splash above, and felt the ache of a night without rest settle deep into my bones. People passed. Joggers in bright windbreakers, office workers clutching their coffee cups, a man walking his dog. Their eyes slid past me as though I wasn't there, or perhaps as if seeing me would demand something of them they weren't willing to give. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be invisible, not unseen, but deliberately ignored. I thought of the years I'd spent at Mission Hospital, steady hands stitching wounds, calming voices through nights when panic filled the ER. I had held strangers' lives together with nothing more than grit and compassion. Now, sitting against a damp wall with rainwater pooling at my feet, no one looked twice. The irony bit deep. I pulled a thin blanket from my suitcase, damp but still warmer than the sweater clinging to me. My fingers shook as I wrapped it around my shoulders. Hunger pressed against my ribs, sharper than the cold. I tried to remember the last full meal I'd eaten. Scrambled eggs 3 days ago. Perhaps, before Paul's temper boiled over. A delivery truck rattled past, sending a spray of dirty water into the gutter. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe through the smell of exhaust, telling myself I could endure this one more day, just one more night. But endurance had its limits, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of measured footsteps was drawing near. At first, I thought the footsteps belonged to another stranger who would pass without a glance. I pulled the blanket tighter, lowering my eyes to the cracked pavement. But the steps slowed, then stopped. A familiar voice, steadier than I remembered, cut through the rain. Eloin. I looked up and nearly forgot how to breathe. Vivienne stood there, her trench coat soaked through, hair plastered against her cheeks. We hadn't spoken more than a handful of times in 20 years, each conversation clipped by old grievances. Yet here she was, staring at me as though the years hadn't passed at all. She knelt down, ignoring the wet ground, and brushed a strand of hair from my face. Her hand was warm, firm, the first real touch I'd felt in weeks. No lecture, no demand for explanation, just presence. She helped me to my feet, her arms slipping under mine as if this were the most natural thing in the world. I wanted to resist, pride clawing at me, but my legs buckled the moment I stood. She tightened her grip, lifted the suitcase with her free hand, and guided me toward a rental car parked by the curb. The heater blasted as soon as we shut the doors. She handed me a thermos, the faint scent of honey and mint filling the air. I cupped it with both hands, trembling as the heat seeped into my skin. For the first time since Paul's door slammed shut, I felt the flicker of safety. I tried to form words an apology, an explanation, but nothing came. Vivienne didn't press. Her eyes stayed on the road, her knuckles steady on the wheel. "You're coming with me," she said, voice low but certain. I nodded, not out of agreement, but because I couldn't imagine going anywhere else. The highway stretched ahead, the wipers beating a rhythm against the windshield, carrying me away from the bridge and into something unknown. We drove for hours, the mountains fading into rolling plains and then into the flat stretches of the Carolina coast. Vivienne barely spoke, her eyes fixed on the road, her silence less awkward than protective. I watched raindrops chase each other across the window, wondering if I was still dreaming. The bridge, the suitcase, Paul's voice, everything felt like it belonged to another lifetime. Yet my body carried the weight of it, still. By the time the salt air drifted in through the vents, I realized we were nearing Wilmington. The sun broke through thin clouds, glinting on water that stretched endlessly to the horizon. Vivienne's jaw tightened as she turned off the highway, guiding us through a gated drive lined with palms and pale stucco walls. My heart lurched. She pulled into a driveway where a cream-colored villa rose against the sky. Wide balconies opening toward the sea. I stared, unable to reconcile what I saw with the person I had become under the bridge. My throat tightened as Vivienne stepped out and retrieved the suitcase from the trunk, carrying it inside without a word. The interior smelled of lemon and new paint. Sunlight poured through tall glass doors, catching on polished floors and pale furniture. I stood frozen in the entryway, hands trembling around the thermos she had given me hours earlier. Finally, she placed a folder in my hands. Inside were photographs of the villa, a deed already signed in my name, and a bank statement that made my chest pound. $5 million deposited in a savings account. I've had it set aside for years. Vivienne said quietly, "You didn't know because I didn't tell you. Now you do." I wanted to protest, to say I wasn't worthy, that I hadn't earned such generosity. Gratitude tangled with shame until I couldn't tell one from the other. But Vivienne's gaze was sharp, unwavering. "This is yours. Elowen, don't let him take anything else from you." The crash of waves echoed faintly through the balcony doors as her words settled into me. Heavy as stone, yet strangely liberating. And only days later, the knock came at the villa's front door. The knock came just after noon, when the tide was low and the villa sat wrapped in the hush of sea air. I opened the door to find Paul standing on the porch, a bouquet of lilies in his hands. He smiled. Too wide, too rehearsed. "Mom," he said softly, "you look good." The flowers dripped with condensation, their stems still wrapped in supermarket plastic. His eyes flicked past me, scanning the foyer, the marble floors, the staircase that curved upward toward the balcony. He wasn't looking at me, he was measuring the space. I stepped back, letting him in, though every part of me stiffened. He set the flowers on the entry table, brushing invisible dust from his sleeves. "I've been thinking about what happened," he began. His voice honeyed. "I lost my temper. I shouldn't have said those things. You didn't deserve that." I studied his face, the way his jaw twitched when he thought I wasn't looking, the quick dart of his eyes toward the folder I had left on the console table. He wasn't here for reconciliation. He was here for the villa. Still, I let him talk. He paced slowly through the living room, touching the back of a chair, glancing at the sea through the sliding glass doors. "This place is beautiful," he murmured, almost to himself. Then he turned back to me, schooling his features into sorrow. "Can we just start over? I want a chance to make things right." The words should have comforted me, but instead, they hollowed me out. I remembered the slam of his door, the word burden, slicing through the storm. My fingers curled around the hem of my sleeve, grounding myself against the surge of memory. "I don't know what you mean by make things right," I said quietly. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I just want to be here for you. Maybe spend some time together. Help out if you need anything." His hand gestured vaguely toward the villa, as though the house itself might invite him in. I met his eyes, steady this time. "We'll see," I said. The words hung between us, neither promise nor refusal, and in the silence that followed, I felt the weight of what would come next. Paul returned 2 days later. No flowers this time, only a briefcase tucked under his arm. He carried himself differently, less contrite, more deliberate, as though he'd decided that words alone would not open the door he wanted. We sat at the dining table, the sea stretching behind us in shades of gray. He slid a stack of papers toward me, his voice smooth. "I've been thinking, Mom, with your health and all this new responsibility, it might be smart to have something in writing. Just simple family wellness agreements. Nothing complicated, just to make sure you're safe." The top page bore a neat title in bold: family support and property coordination. My stomach tightened. Paul leaned in, tapping a paragraph buried halfway down. "See? This one just allows me to handle small things if you're tired: medical appointments, bank errands. It's about convenience. Really. Convenience." I read further, my hands trembling. Phrases like temporary authorization and financial oversight clause leapt out at me, harmless words arranged to sound helpful, but they cut deeper than his insults ever had. I pushed the papers back. "No." His smile faltered. "Mom, don't be dramatic. Everyone does this. It's standard. I'm trying to help." I forced myself to meet his eyes. "You don't get to help by taking what isn't yours." For a moment, the mask slipped. His jaw hardened, his tone sharp. "You really think Vivian can protect you forever? You're not strong enough to manage this alone." Before I could answer, Vivian stepped from the hallway, her phone angled slightly, recording light blinking red. She said nothing, only leaned against the doorframe, watching. Paul noticed, his face draining of color. He gathered the papers quickly, stuffing them back into his case. "Fine," he muttered, forcing a thin smile. "Think about it. I'll come back when you're ready." The door clicked shut behind him, leaving only the sound of waves pressing against the shore. Vivian placed her phone on the table, screen still glowing. "He's not going to stop," she said. I pressed my hand flat against the wood, steadying myself, and for the first time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt prepared. Vivienne wasted no time. The morning after Paul stormed out, she arrived with Grace Hollander, a woman I hadn't seen in years. Her silver hair was clipped neatly, her eyes sharp behind rimless glasses. She carried a leather folder so thick it looked like it could anchor a boat. Grace laid the folder on the table and began spreading documents across the wood copies of filings. Email correspondence, even a draft letter Paul had apparently sent to a law office back in Asheville. "He's already moving," she said. "Power of attorney inquiries, guardianship discussions, all subtle." but clear. The room seemed to tilt as I studied the pages. My son's name, attached to words like authorization and conservatorship. It was one thing to hear his threats, it was another to see them typed in black ink. Vivian's voice cut through the heaviness. That's why we called Grace. You're not fighting this alone. Grace outlined the plan with calm precision. Every account of mine would be sealed under legal oversight, requiring dual verification. The deed to the villa would be bound by a trust provision, impossible to alter without multiple signatures. Even my mail would be redirected to a monitored address. Each safeguard stacked like a wall between me and Paul's reach. As she spoke, I realized how different this battle was from every argument I'd had with Paul. I used to beg, to reason, to plead with him to see me as more than his shadow. Now I didn't need words. I needed paper, signatures, dates, and proof. When Grace finished, she slid a pen toward me. My hand shook only slightly as I signed where she indicated. The ink dried faster than my fear. Vivienne clasped my shoulder. This is how you win, Elowen. Not by arguing, by being untouchable. I closed the folder, steadier than I had been in years, and braced myself for what I knew would come next. It didn't take long for Paul to strike again. Grace received notice of filings in the county court documents claiming I had granted him control over my finances and medical decisions. The signatures were mine in appearance only. Clumsy forgeries dressed up with legal jargon. The hearing was set for a Thursday morning. Vivienne drove us to the courthouse, her jaw set. Grace calm as ever, with her folders stacked neatly in her arms. I sat between them, the hum of the car blending with the storm of thoughts inside me. In the courtroom, Paul sat across the aisle, Marissa beside him. His suit was pressed, his smile practiced, but his eyes darted nervously when the clerk read the case aloud. His lawyer tried to frame the documents as genuine, claiming I had simply forgotten the signing. Grace rose with her quiet authority and began dismantling the story piece by piece. She produced time-stamped emails, handwriting analyses, and testimony from the notary Paul claimed had been present. The man himself appeared via video call, shaking his head as he denied ever meeting me. Each point landed with precision, tightening the net until Paul had nowhere to move. Then the judge turned to me, asking if I wished to make a statement. I stood slowly, hands resting on the edge of the table. My voice didn't need to rise. This is what happens, I said, steady and clear. When you mistake quiet for weak, the words hung in the room, sharper than any evidence Grace had presented. For the first time, Paul's mask cracked, his face reddened, his mouth opening with no words to follow. Marissa looked away, unable to meet my eyes. The judge ruled swiftly the documents invalid, the attempt recorded as fraud. As we left the courthouse, the autumn air felt lighter, as if the weight of years had lifted. Yet beneath that freedom, I knew the question of family lingered, broken and irreparable, waiting to be faced. The court's ruling gave me more than protection. It gave me clarity. For years, I had measured love in what I gave away, as though sacrifice itself was proof of worth. Paul had taught me otherwise. He wanted houses, accounts, signatures, things he could hold, but those things had nearly broken me. So I decided to give differently. With Grace's guidance, I formed the Marlowe Foundation. Its charter, written in black ink, stronger than any plea I had ever spoken. The villa would remain mine until my last breath. But afterward, it would pass into the foundation's care. The accounts Vivienne had preserved for me would fund scholarships for widowed women returning to school, grants for elder protection programs, and a small endowment for nurses in rural clinics, the work I once gave my life to. I did not include Paul's name. I did not leave him a dollar or a claim. He had already received more than enough of me, and what remained was not his to take. When the papers were finalized, I sat by the balcony with the folder in my lap. The ocean stretched before me, restless yet enduring, like the years I had carried quietly. For the first time, I felt my legacy was not something to be divided or stolen. It was something to be lived, then handed forward to those who understood its weight. Inheritance, I realized, was never about money. It was about resilience, the kind that survives storms and betrayal, the kind no court could erase. And with that knowledge, I turned back to the garden, ready to plant something that would outlast us all. The garden behind the villa had been little more than sand and weeds when I arrived, but it called to me. I asked a local nursery to bring young magnolia trees, their roots bound in burlap, their leaves trembling in the sea breeze. With Vivian and Grace watching from the porch, I knelt in the dirt, hands steady as I pressed soil around the first trunk. Each tree was a promise I might never see fulfilled. It would take years for them to reach their height, for blossoms to open wide against the spring sky. Still, I planted them. Some acts aren't about harvest. They're about faith that something lasting can grow from broken ground. Paul never returned after the hearing. His silence stretched into weeks, then months, until even the sound of his name lost its sting. I knew he was out there, nursing wounds, perhaps still angry, perhaps ashamed, but his absence was no longer an emptiness. It was space for me to breathe. That evening, Vivian opened a bottle of wine, and Grace brought out a pie still warm from her oven. We sat on the porch as the tide rolled in, speaking little, sharing a quiet that felt like triumph. No celebration, no grand declarations, just three women who had weathered storms and chosen to stand. I looked out at the magnolia saplings, thin and fragile against the horizon, and felt the peace of knowing I had left something behind that could not be stolen. For the first time in years, I was not surviving. I was living. What is the truest inheritance? A house, millions, or the freedom to finally live on your own terms?